I appreciate the opportunity to think in these ways. One doesn't often go back. One is always thinking about the future. I was born to very loving Mexican parents in Southern California in a place called Chino. You call it life. They had a dairy. So I came into their lives 14 years after my brother was born. So I was sort of like an only child in a lot of ways, because when he was 14, I was born. Two parents who really wanted more children. So it was a joyous situation for them. My father was already in his late 40s. And then 5 years later, a sister. So then they got worried, right? It's like, oh my gosh, no, we're going to leave them orphans. But essentially, I grew up in a Mexican household. My parents were from the state of Jalisco, and they had come to this country independently in their early and mid-20s, and they met in Los Angeles, and decided to stay and go into really the business my dad knew, which was agrarian, so he started dairy. So I had a magical childhood, with cows and chickens and horses. But I think, and a mother who just doted on her two daughters, I must say, but always stressed, you go read, you go study. Did not really stress housework in any real way. Thus, you can see my house is not very organized, but I think my activism, my sense of community, my sense of civic engagement, if you will, came from the kitchen table. I, from a very early age, remember my parents involved in church activities, Catholic church activities, constant fundraisers, and something called fiestas patriotas, where I could see my dad and the priest of the parish, and a man named Nacho Lopez, who went on to be an activist in his own right, and Bert Corona, these guys were at the table. My mother would watch me play around them, and she'd pick it back up. But I was listening, to these words about, vamos a tener esto para que la gente vea, que nosotros también tenemos una cultura. So I would see from an early age their notion of wanting to show off or showcase our community. Didn't quite understand it, but okay. My sounds from childhood were in Spanish. I knew Spanish. I didn't really know English until kindergarten, and then I remember the harsh sounds of English. But really, it was through parents that I learned a notion of doing things for the community. They were very integral in forming a little club in Chino called the ECHO Club, the Educational Community Organization. Way back then, the purpose, to give scholarships to a Mexican child that was going to go to college. And I remember that the first scholarship I remember giving out was to a woman who went to UCLA library school. I had no idea what that was, but she was young and she came and she accepted the scholarship. I don't know how much it was for, but the notion that these adults got together to help give money to go to college. I didn't think of it college for me, but I thought that's interesting. In the meantime, it seemed to me my parents had a lot of fun. Good drinking, good eating, but it was always for a social cause. I had this early consciousness, too, of pachucos. I don't know where that came from, but as in every one of our communities, we had the Mexican Catholic Church and the Anglo Catholic Church. So we were very active in our Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, the Mexican Catholic Church. And as we walked in every Sunday in our little dresses, there were the pachucos. They were sitting on their little haunches outside the church. And I'd walk by and I'd go, I'm going to help them one of these days. I don't know what that meant, but I just thought they need help, Also, but I was already aware. They're Chicanos, but I mean, they're us, but they're different, So it was clearly class here. I never grew up feeling rich, but I did grow up feeling what was culturally appropriate, and what was appropriate for a Mexican girl in particular. High school, not much consciousness there. A few Mexican girls. My parents also did something that I think, in retrospect, was quite interesting, and it went right along with their wanting to sort of integrate into the mainstream. My father belonged to the Rotary Club. Odd, as I think about it now. But he was one of the first Mexicans in that little town that was sponsored into the Rotary Club. And I think in part because he was also light, fair, blue eyes. So maybe they got a little confused and let him in early. But it tortured my mother because she didn't want to be a Rotary-an. But again, that was a club that I heard raise money to do good things in the community. So it was, again, a civic engagement. But I always remember my mother feeling very uncomfortable going to them because she said, these women have education. And I don't. She always felt very badly about that. The other kitchen table lesson was voting. I remember all along, I have the memory right now, my parents would sit together at that breakfast table, which was probably one of those old chrome tables, and fill out the ballot together. ¿Cómo vas a votar? No, y esto. Okay, y esto. So I remember the voting was sacred to them, and I remember studying for their citizenship. It was also one of these triumphant moments when they got their citizenship. My dad got it before my mom, but my mom followed shortly before. I was never told about my history as a Mexicana, never. They made it very clear in la casa español, in la escuela inglés, don't mix the two. So I grew up Spanish and then school English, but it became a dual track, none of this mixing. My parents would go crazy if I got home, part English, part Spanish. I was like, no. And it was really, I think, my awakening to the Chicano, to the Mexican-American reality, because at that time that's what it was when I went off to college, telling my mother, I used my mother as my mediator, because my dad was so old-fashioned, we would say. So I convinced my mother that I wanted to be a nun. And she smiled and she said, I said, Mom, there's this great college in L.A. called Mount St. Mary's, and I think I have a vocation. I think I'd like to go to that college. And es de monjitas. So she said, Los Angeles. Yo voy a hablar con tu papá. So God bless my mother. She talked to my dad. He did not like the idea of my going away. It was almost as though it was okay for everybody else to go to college, but not his daughter, His notion was bilingual bank teller, something professional, but college, going away, that was a whole other thing. But she opened the doors and in her own way said, okay, I've negotiated this with your father. Don't let me down.